Did you like the Condoleezza Rice quote, never be the former anything?
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's so
I
good. It's
firmly
so,
believe you should never be the former anything. You know what I mean? Whether
yeah.
you were a musician and an astronaut, a drug addict, it's like that's not you anymore. That's your former self. That's not who you are today. But the funny part about identity is that we just want we don't want to let that side of ourselves go, even though we're not the same person. Our future self is in totally different direction. We just cling to our former identity.
Many people want to navigate life with peace and joy, but struggle to connect to their intuition. They find themselves overwhelmed, burned out, and frustrated. My name is Francesca Phillips, and I'm obsessed with spirituality and psychology and how the two can intersect to help you live a successful and intuitive life. I believe each of us can accomplish amazing things through balance and healthy habits instead of burnout. Consider this your go-to resource for where spiritual wellness and mindful productivity meets practical wisdom. If you're craving positivity and want to know how to find the answers within instead of searching endlessly without, then you're in the right place. Get ready to feel supported and inspired. This is the Good Space Podcast. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Benjamin Hardy about why personality tests can do more harm than good. Obviously, we're going to talk about more than that, but the Good Space audience, we're very much into not alternative, but looking into different ways of connecting with yourself. And I know personality tests are a huge thing. So we're going to dive into that today. And Dr. Hardy is an organizational psychologist and best-selling author of Willpower Doesn't Work. His blogs have been read by over 100 million people and are featured on Forbes, Fortune, CNBC, Cheddar, Big Think, and many others. He's a regular contributor to Inc. and Psychology Today. From 2015 to 2018, he was the #1 writer in the world on Medium.com. He and his wife, Lauren, adopted 3 children through the foster system in February 2018, and 1 month later, she became pregnant with twins who were born in December of 2018. So thank you for being with me and taking the time to chat today. We talked before this as well that I joined Medium as a writer a few years after you did. And because of your morning routine article, that's what changed everything in my life. And since then, I followed your journey from getting your PhD, going through adoption struggles, to graduating and becoming a successful author. So how did you handle all of that?
Ah, gosh. I mean, a lot. My wife deserves so much of the credit. You know, she's amazing. We were foster parents for 3 years, and that was basically we became foster parents during the first year of my PhD program, and that was like literally the exact same time I started writing online. So this was early 2015, and a lot of it had to do with honestly the morning routine. Like I would wake up. I was a full-time student, and so I would have class from like 8 in the morning to like 3 or 4, and then I'd go home and we'd have 3 brand new foster kids, and we had no clue how to parent, and the house was crazy, and they had their own issues, and so for me, a lot of the becoming a professional writer and stuff while in school was doing what I could before 8 a.m., waking up early, going to the gym, and then writing for a few hours. And obviously, I detail a lot of how that happened. I'm a big believer in journaling, prayer, meditation, and just getting yourself in the right frame of mind, being very clear. I was very clear, for example, on like that I wanted to become a professional writer, and I figured out how to go about doing that. And so, yeah, just a lot of miracles, a lot of, like intentional, this is what I'm going to do, really striving for it, a lot of support from my wife, and just kind of handling it, like,
Yeah.
in Willpower Doesn't Work, I talk a lot about the quote from Will Durant, where he says the ability of the average person could be doubled if the situation demanded it. And
Mm.
our situation demanded it. We put ourselves in a situation that forced us to figure things out. And that's how you become more adaptable and more flexible as a person. And I think people could do a lot more if they would put themselves, proactively put themselves in the situation where then they're required to figure things out that they wouldn't have to. We have 2 twins, as you mentioned, they're 18 months old now, and like they're becoming amazing swimmers because we live here in Florida.
Oh.
We like But like 2 months ago, like they were horrible swimmers, and like we'd put them in the pool and they'd cry and stuff. They got lessons, but now they're amazing. And I think as adults, we stop putting ourselves through such rigorous learning.
Oh, I love that. And I can't wait to talk to you about that singular focus and having that intentionality. But before we start diving into everything, I always like to ask everyone who comes on the show, what's your spiritual practice? I know you kind of touched on it, but what would you say is your spiritual practice?
Yeah, I mean, so member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So like there's so much that goes into that. Prayer is obviously a big one. Fasting, meditation, journaling for me is huge. Just being with my family, honestly, is a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of it's just my relationship with God. A lot of that is just my private time with him, you know, prayer, journaling. That's a lot of it. Then just learning and honestly just getting better and better at clarifying my goals and clarifying what I want to do with my life. And and studying. I mean, I study lots of good books, science, religion, just learning, connecting. So I mean, there's a lot of spiritual practices I'm throwing out there, but I'm actively trying to connect with God, actively learning, actively creating.
Yeah, I love that. And how do you get that clarity? Is it just because you're doing those things, you feel an inspiration or confirmation, or are you asking questions and then receiving a response? What does that look like?
I mean, I give myself space every day. Get yourself into the right environment, pray, meditate, journal. For me, a lot of it has to do with listening to the right information, but then being in a situation where I'm just actively going back and forth. Like I'll have my journal open, I'll just write about what I'm trying to accomplish, talk to God, and then just write. And, usually it just comes over time, but I'm actively doing it, actively writing about it. And I'm a big believer, like my own spiritual belief is that like I can make my own decisions, and then I can figure out if I should adjust those decisions. And my relationship with God is that like I can make my own decisions, but that maybe sometimes my decisions are not the best ones that they could be, and so those should be adjusted. So I'm often making decisions and then going back and forth in my head and with God is like if there's better approaches or better things that I could and should be doing, and I'm fine adjusting those. I'm a big believer that my future self, as an example, is going to be making better decisions than my current self, and that the person I'm right now is not the be all end all, and that hopefully in the future I can make better decisions and I'm pursuing better aims. And so I'm just constantly striving to advance and learn.
I love that. So let's talk about personality tests then, because obviously you have the mindset that you can be whatever you want, you can do whatever you want, and you can change and adjust it as you go. And so your book, Personality Isn't Permanent, comes out today, June 16th, 2020. And with it, you're hoping to debunk the pervasive myths of personality that have captivated pop culture. Everyone's talking about them. People put their Enneagram and Myers-Briggs types in their Instagram bios. Businesses are using it to improve company culture or understand employees. And even one of my psych professors in college had us complete Myers-Briggs. And in your book, you said these tests are not only psychologically destructive, but are no more scientific than horoscopes. I'm sure you got some strong opinions in your inbox when you came out with this book and these statements. So tell us, why are personality tests unscientific and harmful?
There's a lot of reasons. I will say I've recently written a couple articles on Psychology Today about this subject, and you would not believe the emails I get from people.
I bet.
There's a lot of people who are on both sides of the coin where they're like, I'm so glad someone's finally saying this. Other people are like, how dare you? I even got an email from someone who was like, my therapist has been giving me Myers-Briggs, and they've been basing our therapy on Myers-Briggs. She's like, does my therapist not know what she's doing?
Oh my
I'm just
gosh.
like, it's been interesting. It's been interesting. I'll kind of explain just a little bit. I was surprised myself. When I got into my PhD program, and I'm in organizational psychology, and a lot of what we do is test development, measurement. And so I was surprised to hear all of my professors over and over say the exact same thing, that type-based personality tests like Myers-Briggs are just pseudoscience. They're not valid measures. They're not actually measuring personality. Personality doesn't work in types. It's very different. Personality is a lot more contextual. You're not going to be the exact same person in every situation. Context really matters. That's a big concept in psychology. But also, like, the major theory that's like most validated in psychology is called the Big Five. And like the Big Five breaks personality into 5 factors, like extroversion, conscientiousness, and stuff like that. And if you took the Big Five personality test, you would never actually be given a category. You'd actually be given a percentile rank, how you would measure against the rest of the population. So like on extroversion as an example, and it's funny, I've recently taken the Big Five, and I have a pretty average personality in that regard. Like I'm like on the maybe 55th percentile for extroversion, like pretty normal. I'm not like way, and that's actually where most people are at. Like the problem with type-based tests is that they'll give you a score or a category, and you'll assume that you have a more extreme personality than you really have because they give you a type, and then that type becomes a label, and it becomes a big aspect of your identity. And so like identity and personality are actually 2 different things, and identity is enormously more important. Your identity is actually how you describe yourself. It's how you define and describe yourself, usually through stories. And then your identity shapes your behavior, and your behavior over time becomes your personality. And most people are not very, let's just say, intentional about their identity and about what that actually means for what happens in their life. But your identity is enormously key to what you can create in your life. And most people, they're very definitive about their present identity. Actually, Daniel Gilbert, who gave a TED talk about this, it's called the Psychology of Your Future Self. He talks about how human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. But basically, the main idea is it's just, and Carol Dweck said the same thing. She wrote the book Mindset, all about fixed mindset, first growth mindset. But if you're really definitive in about who you are today, then you probably aren't going to be very imaginative about who you could be in the future. You also are mindless to the fact that you actually are a different person than you were in the past. And so my major concern with these tests is what they do to people's identity. They lead people to being very identified with various labels, which stop them from not only seeing that the label is not always true, but then it leads them to confirming the label, seeking to justify and defend the label. And it stops you from imagining a future self that is different from who you are today. You just assume that the person you are today is the person you'll always be, which is patently false, but it also doesn't have to be true. I mean, you can become quite different if you start imagining and then proactively choosing who you want to be.
Yeah. And I know in your book you talk about someone saying they're an introvert as an example. So can you explain how like even labeling yourself as that can influence or affect how you function in the world, basically?
Well, yeah, I mean, so there's a really good quote from Stephen Covey, and I think other people have said similar things, but basically we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. So I mean, if you've called yourself an introvert, you're probably going to be very unflexible to situations that would require being in a social situation, because you would be acting against your identity, and so like acting against your identity is not necessarily a positive experience. You become very unwilling to do anything that you don't see fits who you've defined yourself to be. And so if you've called yourself an introvert, which no one actually is, even Carl Jung said, anyone, if there's a pure introvert or a pure extrovert, that person would be in a lunatic asylum. Like you may identify as one. It would then probably lead you to goals to confirm that, so you probably wouldn't try things outside of that. You wouldn't put yourself in situations that would require uncertainty and that would allow you to kind of flex that muscle where you could become better with people. Instead, you'd pursue goals and you'd tell a story to justify who you are, and it wouldn't require you to change. And that's really what any label does. If you really said, this is who I am, rather than this is who I want to be, then you can have a big ego and you don't have to actually change. And you also don't ever have to be wrong. You're like, this is who I am, and this is who you can expect me to be, and I'm not going to be anyone different. If you tell people about your goals and about your aspirations, that takes a lot more courage, because there's some uncertainty there. You might not actually achieve them. You might fail. And therefore, what would that say about you? Obviously, from my perspective, that's the right way to go, is to tell people about who you want to be, and that your future self is enormously more important than your current self, because your current self is so temporary. But it's a lot easier for people's ego just to say, this is who I am, and I shouldn't be expected to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Why is it important to understand the difference between your former, current, and future selves and how they're totally different people?
Well, I mean, they are, first off. So Daniel Gilbert, he asks people the question, do you think you're the exact same person you were 10 years ago? Almost everyone says no. Like, do you think you're the exact same person you were 10 years ago?
No, not at all. Not even close.
Yeah. And I think probably all of your listeners would say the exact same thing. And actually, most people say that answer. And it's really good to view your former self as a different person. Like, they would make different decisions than you make right now. Like the 11-year-old version of me whose parents got divorced and like I was handling crazy situations, like I'm now not in that same situation, and I know a lot of things, and I would not handle that situation the same way, but I should be empathetic towards my former self. Even the person 2 or 3 years ago, even the person yesterday who may have not been the best parent. You know what I mean? Like, as you grow and you gain new experiences, you can see things differently and you can make different decisions, hopefully better decisions. And you should be empathetic towards your former self, but you can also see that you're not the exact same person you used to be. But that same principle should apply to the future self as well, which not very many people do. Most people think that who they are today is who they'll always be. But it's better from a decision-making standpoint to actually view your future self as a different person. They're in a different situation. They've got different goals, different priorities, different preferences. And if you make decisions based on your future self's preferences, you'll often make better decisions in the present, because they'll be more informed decisions. They won't just be based on what you want in the moment. And there's a lot of research from a guy named Hal Hirschfield at UCLA on that, just that if you view future self as a different person, You can make better choices. And I've done that lots of times. I mean, even today, to be fully honest with you, I was tempted to email you and everyone that I was scheduled to do stuff with and just say, I'm not freaking in the mood because I was just tired. I was tired.
Yeah.
Because yesterday was just a crazy day for me, but I just thought, who is my future self? And that allows you to make intentional, informed decisions in the present. It also allows you to go through the process of what we call deliberate practice, which is ultimately how you develop skills. Like, you can't actually have motivation or the development of real, like, specific skills if you don't have a vision of where you want to go. So it's really important to clarify who you want to be. Most people don't spend the time imagining their future self. They just spend all their time imagining the past or remembering the past, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And thank you for still coming on today. Because I
trust me, I'm really glad I'm here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't even imagine. I know that launching a book just family and just everything and even just the social climate that's happening right now, it's just a lot. So,
well,
but
thank you for coming too.
Yeah, no, of course. But I think it's really, really cool that you are intentional about your future self, because you're right. I've caught myself making decisions or thinking too much on the past and my identity in the past, and reading your book reminded me, oh my goodness, that doesn't matter. I need to be future thinking and connected to my future. And I think that's a huge piece. So how does trauma...
Really quickly, do you care if I add one thing to all this?
Please do it.
Just because you brought up so much good stuff on spirituality before. So during COVID-19, I actually read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, 2 times. Have you read that one?
Yes, it's amazing.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's good. And what Frankl talked about is that without a sense of hope and purpose for your future, the present becomes meaningless. So like, you actually need the future in order to actually function properly in the present. And so for the people in the Holocaust, like, when they lost hope in the future and it was just all about what was in front of them, they died. Like, literally they died. It was just too unbearable because they were starving to death. But like with Carol Dweck's work on mindset, the students with the fixed mindset are defined like, so Carol Dweck would give all sorts of her students really hard challenges and they would all fail. But the people with the fixed mindset, as soon as they would fail, they were completely defined by what happened in the moment. They didn't see themselves as being able to change. They said the meaning that they gave to the failure was, I'm dumb. This is who I am. I can't be different in the future. This is where I'm at. Whereas people with the growth mindset, because they had hope and perspective in their future, they were like, I'm not there yet. And that's actually what Carol Dweck says. She says you get to luxuriate in the power of yet. You get, yet is a beautiful word. But also, like, all of the research from Angela Duckworth on grit, and as an example, she talks about grit literally relies on hope. You wouldn't be gritty. Like, you asked me, how did we do it? How do we have 5 kids in 1 year or whatever? And like, yeah, we're pretty dang gritty. I'll say we're pretty gritty. I think you're probably pretty gritty too. But the only reason we can even have grit is because of hope. And so part of future self, like, I think it can be very practical. I think from my perspective, it's really powerful to have a future self beyond this life, that I can have a perspective of where I'm at in the future that informs my decisions here and now. That's really awesome. Very helpful. Gives me a lot of hope, gives me a lot of direction, really helps me make better decisions. But also, like, on a more practical level, like to achieving results or success or whatnot, having a future self like 2 or 3 years out, that's like very specific, that I've really spent time imagining and am openly admitting and telling people about, and then literally investing money to move myself forward towards specific goals, whether it be mentorships to learn how to write, or whether it be, like, hiring a financial advisor so I can get good at, like, money. Like, you want to really get specific about who your future self is, because it's a decision you make, and it's up to all of us to really clarify the circumstances and the situation we want for ourselves.
Yes, I love that. And that takes a lot of faith to invest money, because I feel like when money comes into the picture, it's like, whoa, do I really believe in myself? Do I really believe in that future? Because yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, that's incredible.
That's what gets you committed.
Yeah, no, seriously, that's amazing. I mean, I used to get scared to buy a $300 course. So I'm like,
Me too.
You know what I mean? And so now I'm like, I laugh at it because I'm like, oh, I will happily pay $2,000 for a course if I know that it's going to solve this problem or get to where I'm going faster. So I just think, yeah, that's amazing that you were able to connect so much to that future. And This is really random, but I was watching the Michael Jordan docuseries,
I love it.
The
I'm a
Last
big
Dance.
fan.
Oh
I'm a
my
big I'm a
gosh.
big bas- I'm a big basketball fan.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, then of course you've seen it. But I was like on fire after I watched it. I'm like, okay, let's go. Let's do this, because it reminded me of what you said in your book, that when you have that focus on that singular goal, I forgot the exact example you used, but for Michael Jordan, I was like, his goal was get that championship. Everything
Mhm.
he did,
Yep.
eat, sleep, breathe, everything he did was funneled to that one goal. And then you see
Yeah.
how much of a amazing player he is, and he's just, no one will ever be better than him, I'm sorry. But his mindset, and he had that grit, and he had that connection to the future, and he had all those things that you're talking about, and it's just like, what? It was crazy.
No, I love all that. Yeah, I call it the future self filter. But like, yeah, I mean, your future self should be the dictating factor for what you do here and now. Whereas most people's dictating factor is pain or pleasure. Like they'll make
Mm,
decisions based on like what's natural or what's easy or what's hard. And if it's hard or it doesn't feel great, they're not going to do it. What's interesting about Michael Jordan, and he's said this a lot, is, and his trainers have even said that, like Tim Grover, his like personal development trainer, I mean his like fitness trainer,
mm.
Michael actively turned weaknesses into strengths. Like he wasn't just like pursue what's easy. He was so committed to a particular outcome that he would become what was required to get there, rather than choosing goals based on what your current strengths are, your current personality is. He chose the goal he wanted, and he became the type of person who could create that result. And when you're committed to like a goal, your decision making in the moment is not based on what's immediately pleasurable. Sometimes you do things that are freaking hard. Sometimes you do things that are slightly unnatural or difficult. Like I remember the first year being a foster parent of 3 kids. No, I didn't like going home. Like it was not easy, and it took a lot of convincing of myself. I had to literally build the identity that these were my kids, that this is who I am, because it was a shift. Um, and I had to invest in them, and I had to start, and I will say I had a change of heart, and it became what I genuinely wanted. And you can change your desires, but to only do things that are seen as just, this is my natural strength, so this is who I am, really limits what then becomes possible for you. It limits your flexibility. It limits your chances of building confidence. It limits your ability to make choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And how can we change to become more open or more flexible? Because I know you mentioned that two major obstacles that prevent people from predicting and creating their future personality is, one, we assume that our present personality is a finished product. So we already mentioned that. And then we overemphasize the importance of the past, which creates the narrow view. So how can we start changing to become more open? Because I know we can say, oh, connect to the future, but I guess what does that mean, or how would you respond to that?
Mm-hmm. Well, so one of the core assumptions in psychology is that the most easy way to predict a person's future behavior is by looking at their past, which sucks. But because it's bad if you want to make change. Because it's like, well, as an example, my younger brother, who we've recently checked into a treatment facility, because over the last decade and a half, he's relapsed into drugs and things like that. Even though now he's in a treatment facility, and I just was literally with him 2 days ago, we ran 4 miles. It was amazing. He's on a great plane. I think it'd be really easy for me and all of us around us to just say, yeah, but we know who Trevor is. Like, we know that eventually he's going to fall back, and that we have enough history, right? And that's really the case with most people. Like, I would say, as a majority, a really easy way to predict someone's future behavior is simply by looking at the past. This book is not written for someone who wants that to be true for them. Like, even if you've had a decent past, even if you're a great person, if you want to go to a different level, or if you want to become better in some form or fashion, your future actually has to look different from your past. You actually have to really get clear on who your future self is, and that thing, your future self, not your former self, needs to be the thing predicting your daily behavior. And it can. It does take courage, 100%. It always takes courage. There's going to be difficulty, but I think the kind of key steps, although there are many, first you actually have to clarify who that future self is. No one can make that decision except for yourself. Like, and that's a decision you have to make, and you can adjust that decision as you go. Like the future self I was chasing maybe 2 or 3 years ago is different than the future self I'm chasing right now. You know, um, but once you've clarified based on where you're at right now, what you think would be the most valuable or the most useful life you can create. Like as an example, I didn't choose writing these types of books because I thought it would be like the funnest thing to do. I chose this path because I thought it was going to be the most useful or the most valuable thing I could do with my life right now, based on what I understood. And maybe as I'm growing and gaining more understanding, there's more valuable things I could do. Maybe even just spending more time with my family, and so then I can clarify a future self that's a little better than the one I've been chasing in the past. So I think just making an informed decision about the person you want to be, and then beginning to start telling people, from like an Alcoholics Anonymous perspective, there's a really good quote that says, "You're only as sick as your secrets." And basically what that has a lot to do with, obviously, trauma. You want to actually be open and honest about the things you've gone through, but it also has a lot to do with just being open and honest about your goals and just saying, this is the person I want to be. A person's ready to overcome an addiction when they start actually saying, I need help. And also this is where I want to go. And that's where the ego goes away. You start being a student rather than thinking you have all the answers. The cool part about recognizing that your future self is a different person is that you don't have the answers. I have no clue how to achieve the goals that I'm currently pursuing. I don't. Current Benjamin Hardy talking to you is not future Benjamin Hardy who's achieved these goals. In the future, I'll have more knowledge. And so just acknowledging that you're in the student position, you're striving for these things and you want help. Then I would say investing, like literally investing money into your goals, whether it be into coaching, the right environments, mentoring, whatever it is that's going to allow you to go through that deliberate practice process where you're actually actively learning and getting the help you need and the support you need to become who you want to be, whether that's being a better mom, whether that's being, just actually building a support group and network around your future self. So that would include redesigning your environment and your social group to support the person you're trying to be, and obviously eliminating the triggers or the situations or the potentially even the people who would pull you back, who, you've got to kind of limit some exposure to the people who refuse to allow you to go where you want to go.
Yeah. And I love that. And I really like how you brought up the ego, because I know that is a very stagnant mechanism that we have where it wants us to stay with what's comfortable, with what we know. It wants to know that things we're doing are reliable and all those things. And I know on the Good Space, we always talk about ego and how it locks you into attachments and identity to feel secure. So I just want to make sure that the distinction is made that even though you see your future self and you get a goal and you have a decision to go after that, you have to allow that flexibility, because what's the line? Like, how do you know when it's just, that's my ego wanting me to achieve that goal versus, oh, this is actually something I desire that's aligned, that's connected. So let's do that.
Yeah, I love that question. By the way, the ego just wants to be right. I think that's why it's really easy just to say, this is who I am. It's a lot harder to say, this is what I want. And also I might fail. I think courage is the willingness to potentially fail. Uncertainty means that there is no absolutely guaranteed outcome. As far as like making sure that your goal is the right goal, or like not just an ego-based goal, that's like a super tough question. Like, as I think about my own goals, yes, I have goals that potentially have some ego wrapped up in them. Like, admittedly, like with Willpower Doesn't Work, I really wanted to hit the New York Times bestseller list. Didn't end up hitting the list, and it hurt a lot. And I think that I think as time passes and as you become more mature as a person, you make decisions and you set goals really based on, in a lot of ways, not only your current values, but the values of your future self. Like, you can project the type of person you want to be, and I think you don't necessarily have to explain the rationale of your goals to other people, but I actually think it's helpful. Like, not only telling people your goal, but telling people why it matters to you. I think that level of accountability and openness and transparency allows you and other people to realize why you're doing it. And I think that level of courage, like, admittedly, I want to sell millions of copies of this book. That is my goal. And the reason I want to do it is to set up my family and myself financially, but also set myself up as an author so that I can continue to do what I'm doing, because I love doing it. I think it's good, useful work. But I also want to put my family in a position where I don't have, like, I'm going to step away from a lot of my entrepreneurial pursuits, and I actually am going to spend a lot more of my time on spiritual pursuits. And so, like, I can justify that to you. I don't necessarily need one big part of all of this is when you're explaining your goals to people, you actually don't need other people's validation. Like,
Yes.
but I think if you're really open and honest about why you're doing what you're doing and also what you're doing, it forces you to ask yourself, is this because of ego? And it really doesn't matter if people disagree with you or not. But I think if you're really open and honest, especially with yourself, and there's a really good quote from Dan Sullivan. He says, all progress starts by telling the truth. According to my own spiritual beliefs and stuff like that, I think it's fine to pursue great outcomes, especially if they align with, let's just say, God's will, or if they align with just good things. Like, I'm fine with that. If I'm doing things for good reasons, unless for some reason while during my journaling practice and my prayer practice, I'm like, you know what, this is not the right goal. I need to just focus on this. Like, that's between me and God. I just think, I guess, in the cluster of all of this, all these words, it was probably the most challenging question I've gotten in a long time. I would say, be really open and transparent with those around you and even other people, and you don't need to justify it.
Yes, I love that. And it kind of ties in well with this quote I absolutely loved, how you describe desire, that just because you want something doesn't mean you should want it. Our desires do not come from our innate personality. Instead, our desires are trained, usually through experiences we've had, society, media, and those around us. Desires aren't innate. They are trained and fueled. They are clinged onto and identified with. Your desires shouldn't be mistaken as the real you. They are simply things you've attached meaning to, which you can also detach or change the meaning of. And I think that perfectly just like sums up what you said. And again,
A
back to
lot
my
cleaner way.
yeah, no, but it's amazing. When I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, everyone needs to hear this, because I mean, everything we've talked about, it just is so perfect. Like, you choose your desire. It's not an
And
innate
then you
thing.
fuel it.
Yeah,
And
and then
you can pull off from it, right? If you feel like, holy cow, this was the wrong thing to want, right?
yeah, absolutely. And just not having the ego attached to, or the shame of thinking, oh, I failed or whatever. And I think that's just amazing. And so
I actually
actually,
read a quote, by the way.
oh,
I don't want to cut you off, but I've read
no,
it was actually a scripture, and I usually don't quote scriptures on podcasts, but and I don't have it correct. I think it's in like Second Timothy, but it said like that you should outgrow youthful lusts. Like, the word youthful lusts, just where it's like you should stop fulfilling youthful lusts, whatever that may be. Like, it could just be like, wanting to look good in front of your friends. Like, that word youthful lusts has just been in my head a lot lately, where it's like, where I analyze what I'm up to, and I sometimes think, is this a youthful lust? Like, is this something that some people are going to keep wanting into their 40s, 50s, and 60s because they're just not going to outgrow their ego, and I think, like, just learning how to stop wanting things that ultimately are just youthful lusts.
yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you say that, because I thought of my time in the music industry. I was in it for 6.5 years and worked with amazing people. I was in the thick of it. And that is continually been something that has been hard for me to let go, as part of my identity, as part of my network, as part of like what I'm doing. So reading that in your book, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the thing that I'm holding on to and I can't let go. And it's stopping me from the future self.
Did you like the Condoleezza Rice quote, never be the former anything?
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's so
I
good. It's
firmly
so,
believe you should never be the former anything. You know what I mean? Whether
yeah.
you were a musician and an astronaut, a drug addict, it's like that's not you anymore. That's your former self. That's not who you are today. But the funny part about identity is that we don't want to let that side of ourselves go, even though we're not the same person. Our future self is in totally different direction. We just cling to our former identity.
Yeah. And I think that's ego, because it's scary. It's scary not knowing what's next or what's ahead or how it's going to turn out. So I loved some of the tips that you mentioned on how to kind of get into that future self. And I've already been doing this for multiple days, where you affirm that you're going to be successful, that you're going to succeed in what you're trying to accomplish, that life is amazing. And you said to do that before you write in your journal, just to
Mm.
kind of write from the vantage of your future self. And I love that. So what else are things that you would recommend for people to try in order to connect to and act upon that future self?
Yeah, I think that when and where you, let's just say, visualize or make decisions really matters. Like, I actively put myself in environments, whether it be to meditate, whether it be to pray, whether it be to get hyped up. Sometimes I'm a part of mastermind groups and stuff like that. And so I actively put myself in various environments that will impact my energy, my mindset, so that I can make decisions from the right place. I think often people don't make big decisions in their lives because they don't put themselves in the right frame of mind. Like there's a concept called set and setting. You need the right mindset, but you also need the right setting sometimes to have what we would call peak experiences. Like on a daily basis, I try to go to bed earlier and wake up earlier. I mean, that's one of the things I talk about in the book. Go to bed earlier because at the end of the day, your willpower is shot anyways. Most people, their last hour or two is mostly just unhealthy consumption, whether that be consuming media, consuming junk food, consuming wine, whatever it is. I mean, I'm not telling you what not to do, but I'm just saying usually at the end of the day, our willpower is so fried that we make short-term decisions. We're not thinking about our future self. We're just very much just fueling dopamine because we're fried. And so we're making short-lived decisions. And so that obviously has an impact not only on your confidence as a person, because you're kind of just, your identity in many ways is impacted by your behavior. And so if you're doing all of those things, which all of us do, it then has ripple effects on what you project into the future. Like if you just feel bloated, or if you're just not actually having high quality experiences or making short-term decisions, that will ripple into your confidence in general. But also it will clearly ripple into the effects you could have the next morning during your morning routine, which could be very useful time. And so for me, one of the recommendations I would have is go to bed with a purpose. Like literally, it could literally just be, I'm going to wake up and go to the gym, and like set your gym clothes out so that when you wake up the next morning, you don't have to make that decision. So in psychology, we connect willpower with decisions, and we call it decision fatigue. But the more decisions you have to make, the less optimal those decisions become. And so kind of like setting yourself up for success the night before, if you just laid out what you want to do the next morning, then you don't have to make those decisions when you're groggy and in bed. Like actually set yourself up the next night or the night before for success. Make it really easy for your future self to not have to make a decision because the decision was already made under better circumstances, under circumstances where you weren't, in bed with your alarm going off. So going to bed a little earlier and avoiding the unhealthy consumption, waking up with a purpose so you don't have to make the decision and deal with decision fatigue, and just actually then going forward and doing something towards your future self before the busyness of the day. I also think journaling as a practice in general is a really amazing thing. Just journaling about your goals. What that does from my perspective, it just allows you first thing in the morning, pray, meditate in the right environment, think about your future self. It then allows you to live intentionally versus on autopilot, rather than waking up reactive and to your environment and to what's urgent. It's like you've put yourself in a situation where you are clear on who you want to be. And now you're actively taking action towards your future self, which is solidifying to your identity that this is who you really are. And you're actually making progress. I mean, it takes time. I wrote hundreds of articles between 2015 and 2018, really 2017, because 2017 is when I got my book deal for Willpower Doesn't Work. From 2015 to 2017, full-time student, but I'd wake up early, write in my journal, visualize my future self for 6-8 months. Articles all were terrible, but just over time, better prolific than perfect. You keep doing it, you keep showing up, and you keep confirming who you want to be. You start you start getting better. And you can change your circumstances and scenarios by just doing this, And so I invite people to look at their daily life and just like literally maybe take stock on all the things you've done today and ask yourself, how many of these behaviors are in support of my future self, or how many of them are things that are literally to the detriment of my genuine goals, and that they're just things I'm doing because of the current role or environment that I've created or the current identity that I've had. Often a lot of the things we're doing are just out of habit from our former self. They're things that are not supporting who we really want to be, and we're just not spending enough time like literally thinking about and then doing things towards our future self and orienting our life and our environment and our situation towards our goals, which we totally can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so powerful. And I'm glad that you mentioned it's hard at first. It's not going to just happen. The habit's not going to be there overnight. You have to give yourself grace, and you have to allow yourself to, stumble a few times. I know when I started my morning routine, it was not perfect from the start. It took me like half a year to actually just do it every day, and even on the weekends. So I love that you mentioned that. And is it, when you think of your future self, is that what helps you to overcome the discomfort and the uncomfortable feelings? Because let's be real, most people if they're uncomfortable or it's a lot of effort, they're just going to go back to what they're doing. So is it that connection that really changes overcoming that?
I think the commitment to the future self gives you the courage to be vulnerable and honest with other people. Again, going back to transparency, that you need help. Often you'll hit walls. I hit many walls. As an example, trying to complete my PhD. I almost got kicked out of my program, almost gave up. But luckily for me, my wife was just as committed to me finishing that as I was. And so like she pushed me along, like she was committed to our future self. But and I would often have to call, what I would call in the book empathetic witnesses. But I would have to call people really important encouragers. And I think we all need people who encourage us when we're struggling, because if you're pursuing bigger goals than you've currently achieved, obviously you're going to hit walls because your current self's just not there yet, which is totally understandable and totally fine. And it's when you hit those walls, like there's one of my favorite quotes is, we're kept from our goals not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. And so often you'll hit an obstacle, which is totally normal and natural. And that could then either lead you to questioning, should I keep going or should I just take a clear path to an easier outcome? And I think often you need to get help and support. You need to say, look, I need help. I'm struggling. There were many times, as an example with this book, Personality is Impermanent, where I was satisfied. I was like, multiple drafts before where I was just like, I'm done with this. Like I took me way longer than I wanted to. And I was like, no, I think it's good. And luckily I had editor and other people who were like, nope, we see so much potential in this book. We're not letting you quit. Even if it's terrible for you, like go take another 2 weeks, try to figure it out. And I luckily had to get a better editor. I had to get a really good editor to help me through it, help me think things through. So you also just need to expand your support network and get better people to help you through your goals, and to be open and honest when you are literally stuck. And the longer you keep it in, you're as sick as your secrets. You could turn the obstacles into a trauma, which would then lead you to giving up on the goal.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Well, thank you for sharing so many wonderful insights today. If you're listening, clearly you need to buy this book, Personality Isn't Permanent. I'll make sure it's linked in the show notes. It's really an amazing book because you take a topic and something that's so popular in culture and you dive so deep, and it like really makes you think, and it really makes you question what you're doing, and the tips that you give are so useful. And I just started using them as soon as I read it. And so it really is a powerful book, and I really hope that if you're listening that you buy this book. And out of everything though that you shared today, if someone could take away just one thought or one thing to get closer to taking that ownership of their life and their personality, what is it that you would want them to walk away with?
I mean, the main thing is identity. That identity is your choice. Often identity is not thought out very much. We just sometimes particularly say, just this is who I am. You can catch yourself saying really weird and limiting things about yourself. And I think just being conscious of your identity and the person you describe yourself to be, that is not fixed. Just because you've described yourself a certain way in the past, or just because you've been a certain way in the past, doesn't mean that's who you have to be in the future. The future is open territory. And actually, even I explained in the book, the past is pretty open territory as well. But your future self, in my opinion, should be the thing that you should base your identity upon, your chosen person, your chosen identity. And that should then, I invite you to have the courage to admit that that's what you would love to have if you could have it. And right now, you may not have the mindset to get there. Right now, you may not have the support, the encouragement, the skills to get there. But if you admit that that's where you want to go, and you start telling people about it without ego, then you can start watching yourself build a routine and an environment and maybe a skill set around getting that. So the invitation of this book is, rather than your past being the thing predicting your future, or the past being the thing predicting your behavior, your future should be that thing. And it totally can be. And that's how you live an intentional life.
I love that. Well, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you chatting with me today. And I hope that you guys are well in Orlando and everything's good. And thank you so much.
No, thank you. Huge pleasure.
Now it's time for an affirmation. I am open and flexible. I choose the person I'm becoming and act with deliberate intention. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with a friend. See you later.